Hi. Hello, Beverly. It's George at large. I am glad to be here, and I want to thank the BevCam people for allowing me to blabber on. And it's Happy Halloween also. I'll be handing out candy to little kids later on, which is always a lot of fun for everybody. And it's windy. I think all the leaves will be down by the end of the weekend, and I think the kids are going to be dry. They'll just be getting their costumes blown around, I suppose. So the last time I was on, I described hitchhiking across Canada on the Trans-Canadian Highway. And that was a fairly quick trip, maybe 3.5 days to do that. And because people ask you to drive and take up some of the driving time. So you end up going quick because every time you get out of a car, another guy might pick you up so he can take a nap and you can drive him. So by the time I got from Montana to Montreal, I was pretty exhausted, and because I'd been doing most of the driving. So that's just how it goes. If you're getting a free ride, you got to pay for something. So now the trip back was a little different than the trip going west to east. East to west, I got through Vermont, New Hampshire and all that, and I crossed on the border up where somewhere in upstate New York, or maybe it was Vermont. So at the customs, this is in maybe 1981, I think, and you didn't have to have a passport then, and if you looked fairly clean and decent, they just would wave you on through. But the Canadian side would not let you hitchhike near the crossing border. You had to be completely out of sight somewhere up the road. They didn't want people to be intimidated because they did have a pullover spot where you could like pull over and rearrange the cooler. So I continued to walk west, and I always carried a sign. So this sign would say Montana going east to west. And I always walked. I always figured if people saw you walking and you had a sign that showed a long distance, they might be more inclined to give you a ride. And it actually works really well. So I got through that part of it, and I'm going along well away from the Great Lakes still, and I get picked up by a truck driver. And that worked out pretty good. He gave me a long ride, and in the ride, he said that he had to go up to a town that was north of the highway, but that the road just looped back around. So it was a little detour so he could see his girlfriend. And I'm like, okay. And I had a map, but I didn't really know what he was doing. And there was no GPS in those days and no cell phones or anything like that. So anyhow, we start going up this road, and we're going up, it's like 80, 90 miles that we've traveled so far. And we get to the town he's talking about, and he says, well, just, hang out, grab a bite to eat or something. I'll be back in a half hour or so. And he comes back in a half an hour, and he says, I'm not going any further on, so you'll have to just go from here. But just go west, and you'll end up back on the Trans-Canadian Highway. So this was one of those bypass loop roads because the highway actually skirts the edge of the Great Lakes. And so there's a lot of extra miles. So this truck driver was trying to cut that out. But the loop road that he took me on was a loop road that pretty much just local farmers and ranchers used to access their farms and ranches. And the only town on a 240-something mile road was the one we were in. So consequently, he left me off in the middle of nowhere, is what it amounts to. It took me a day and a half to get out of there and back on the Trans-Canadian Highway. And when you're hitchhiking, that's not all that much fun because you end up sleeping in a field or in the woods, or, if you're lucky enough to find an abandoned house or something, you can use that. But anyhow, a day and a half later, I get back on the Trans-Canadian, and I'm going along, just getting short rides. This is not turning out to be very fast. I was meeting some nice people. The Canadians are awesome. They're great, and the country's fantastic. And you see a lot of country on their highway, The north of the Great Lakes is all woods, so you pretty much just see trees on the highway. Not until you get further west of the lakes do you start getting into the long vistas. So at some point along these lakes, I'm up on the road, and the Trans-Canadian Highway in those days was pretty much just two wide lanes, one going west, one going east, not a lot of room up there. So you have to kind of walk on the road to hitchhike. So at one point, I see a truck coming my way, a semi-truck, and he is actually in my space, and he's coming along, and I literally had to jump into the ditch. And I get into the ditch in time to not get smushed, but my head was only about 3 feet from the road, and in my mind's eye, I can see this much of his front tire over the edge of the pavement. And if he had hit that soft shoulder, he would have dragged, the whole truck would have just blown off into the ditch like you've done with many snow. If you hit deep snow, it just pulls you off in that direction. At that point, the back of the truck probably would have squashed me pretty good. But he kept it together, and the truck went on by, and I got up out of the ditch and kept going. So not all the Canadians are very good people, just like we have the same problem in this country. And so I'm going west again, and everything is going okay. And then I get picked up by a young woman in her van, and I'm halfway through the trip. So I'm very tired, dirty. So she invites me to her house, and I can clean up. And she just starts telling me about breaking up with her boyfriend. So I have to hear this whole thing about breaking up with her boyfriend, which is, you know, every guy loves that. And so I got trapped at her place for about 4 or 5 hours before she'd bring me back out to the highway. So that was another delay. And so I get through that, and now I'm probably a little more than halfway. I would say I was somewhere above North Dakota. And it's all prairie, wheat fields. North Dakota is almost all sunflowers, and just millions and millions of them as far as the eye can see. And so going along on here, it's all just wheat fields, hay fields, nothing much else is going on. The next delay I got was some kids that decided they needed to terrorize me and go driving by and throw something at me. So I was able to dodge them. I was carrying a big walking stick, and I used to be taller than I am, but I'm not a guy you think you could look at and mess with too much. But they're in a car, and they're dumb idiots. So they did this about 3 times, maybe 4, and yelling and being threatening and everything. So at that point, I decided I would get off into the woods and just camp out and just let them go on their way. But that meant that I couldn't hitchhike into the evening and afternoon time. So that caused another delay. Finally, I get back on the road the next day, and I'm going through Moose Jaw. Moose Jaw is a pretty good-sized town in the middle of Saskatchewan, and it's kind of famous as a tourist attraction. There's a big lake and stuff there, and but it's all still grain elevators and lots of big open spaces. I actually kind of liked the town, so I went ahead and spent 4 hours of my own time walking around and looking at Moose Jaw, because why not, right? The town's called Moose Jaw. So anyhow, I get that going. Now the next leg of the journey goes through Alberta, and Alberta is where the prairie starts to turn into the Rocky Mountains. And then Banff National Park starts to show up. And in Banff National Park, I get picked up by a couple that had just gotten married. And they were maybe 2 sheets to the wind celebrating. And they load me into the back seat, and we're all joking, and they had done drugs and were smoking pot, and I don't do any of that when I was hitchhiking because I don't want to spend a year in jail in a foreign country. In those days, everything was illegal. But they started driving up on these passes. I didn't know that we were off the highway. So we go up these passes, these long, windy roads, and they were basically sightseeing and having a good time on their wedding. And at one point, I asked them to just let me out, because the guy is like all over the road, and now they're getting drunker. And so he lets me out at the top of one of the passes. And I'm probably up 6,800 feet or so. And I can pretty much see all of Canada from up there. But stopping there meant that there weren't going to be that many people traveling through there. And that took me a long time to get down onto the west side of the pass. And on I go, and I get to north of Montana, where I have to go. Now I have to go south, and I go through... it wasn't Edmond. It was Cochrane. I think it was Cochrane, BC. And this is there's a lot of Indian reservations right through the area. And I come down into the Browning Indian Reservation, which is on the east side of Glacier National Park. So that's a pretty nice area. And so I got delayed at the reservation because there just weren't many people traveling west from there. Most of them would go east to go to Great Falls or to go to Havre and do some shopping and stuff in a bigger city. And it took quite a while to get through Glacier National Park. And then I finally got down to Kalispell and was able to make my way to my girlfriend's house down there. And that was about the size of the trip. Going from east to west took 6 days to go that far, and going west to east was 3.5 days. And it just shows you a difference in accommodating people, nice folks, good folks, stuff like that. And one note, in the early days of hitchhiking around the country, in like 1975, I forget, I think I hitchhiked out to Denver. But the Vietnam War had wrapped up, and everybody was realizing, the protesters and the hippies, they were all right about it. And some of these flat-top, crew-cut redneck guys, they had started coming around to our way of thinking. And I started getting picked up by guys that wouldn't even look at me twice or maybe try to run me off the road. So social politics matters. Social media. We did a protest in the Vietnam War, really paid off in a lot of ways, changed people's minds. And that's what hitchhiking has done for me, was meeting a lot of people, and it's nice. And now we're in the same similar situation where people need to get out and they need to vote and they need to protest and they need to start making the government actually do its job. So anyhow, the other thing I want to mention is, again, I want the art students in town to get out on the streets with their sketch pads and start meeting some of your neighbors and show them your talents. Get the school to buy some street permits from the city. It's only $100 a year, and they could do an umbrella one where, 3 or 4 students could use it. And I have students coming by when I'm selling on the street, and they want to know about how this is done. And, if they see an old fart like me out there doing it, they could raise their confidence levels up a bit and get out there themselves. I know when you're 18, 19 years old, you have no idea what you're doing, nothing. You might think you do, but you've got a long way to go before you have the kind of confidence that can just let you go and happily set up and start saying hi to everybody and having them come over and share a joke or two and maybe sketch them, or sketch one of their kids, or maybe even get 50 or 60 bucks for one of your pieces of art. So I suggest you start doing it. And that's about it. So thanks for listening to me babble on, and I'll come up with a story that is not hitchhiking, something different, maybe like working in the woods, cutting down trees and earning money, or not earning money, because that happened a lot too. So I'm going to sign off and go home and take the weekend off. So thanks, Beverly. Thanks, BevCam. We'll see you next time.